Well, I'll start with a little bit of an intro and a welcome just from the ad club. So I'm a board member. My name is Chris Wilson, and I've been on the board just for a few months, I guess, just since late last year, maybe. So a newbie, but excited to be hosting this session for you guys. We've got a pretty exciting panel today with Brendan Shaughnessy and Kesha Alexander talking about strategy. So I'm really looking forward to that. And I will just give another second, see if anybody pops in here and we'll get going. And Brendan and Kesha, just so you know, I'm gonna let you guys do a brief little intro and tell these folks kind of a little bit of background on you and your careers, where you're at now. Brendan, your ties to Springfield, all of that. So
I'll start revving the engine up. I'll get ready.
Yeah. I think we're probably good though. So, all right, well, let's get going. Kesha, let's start with you. You can give us a little bit of a background on you and your professional experience and where you're at and all that good stuff.
Yeah. Hey, everybody. I am Kesha Alexander. I am a co-owner of Supper Marketing, and I have been in the agency space, basically grew up there since I graduated college, and have been in food service marketing is kind of where I started here in Springfield, Missouri, and worked my way through kind of the very traditional account service path in the space, and then had a little stint at Shaughnessy Chocolate, which is a small batch bean to bar chocolate maker, which is focused on, my job was focused on marketing and sales, but it was a small business. So I ended up doing kind of, taking out the trash and doing inventory while trying to make sales calls. So it was a great experience for me to kind of learn how a business works. And then I got the opportunity to move to another agency, and still in the account space, but really had a chance to kind of flex my strategic muscle there, and had an opportunity to move into a strategic planning role, and worked to collaborate on building up a strategic planning practice there. So that's kind of where I was there for the majority of my career. And then just most recently in the last year and a half, started my own little agency with a partner, focused on kind of a broad spectrum of marketing, B2B, B2C, and kind of full service offering.
Awesome. That's great. All right, Brendan, lay it on us.
I'll jump in. Thank you. I don't have quite as long a successful career as Kesha, but it's definitely, I definitely relate with a lot of the twists and turns, at least in my shorter career that I've had thus far. But I'm Brendan Shaughnessy. I'm a strategy director at a cultural consultancy in New York City. And I've been here for the last 2.5 years or so. The reason I'm on this call is I grew up in Springfield, spent pretty much my whole life there growing up, went to Springfield Catholic, and then went to the University of Missouri School of Journalism, where I found out just how little money journalists make, and decided that I wanted to instead do something a little bit different, a little more in the advertising world. So I graduated, and I worked at a small firm in Kansas City called Futurecast, where our whole research was geared around understanding emerging generations, so focused on millennials like me and Gen Z like my little sister. And then I moved over to an agency in Kansas City called Barkley, which some of you might be familiar with. Started out in a new business capacity, was trying to get smart on new business opportunities, and that sort of lent me in getting smart on clients that ended up coming on board. So made for a really great transition onto the strategy department. Spent a couple of years there, and then my girlfriend, now fiance, really wanted to move to a bigger city, so I suggested Chicago, and she suggested New York, and we compromised by moving to New York. So it was a whirlwind for a full-time Missouri kid like myself. And I hated it for about a day, but I found my footing, and I've really loved it ever since, and have met a lot of really interesting and unique people. So I'm in a 1-bedroom apartment now. It was in a 270 square foot studio with my fiance and our 2 cats when this thing started. So it's great to have a little breathing room with you all today, and really looking forward to discussion. As I like to say, we eat quite a bit of strategy around here. So great to have like-minded folks willing to engage. So thanks so much.
Awesome. Well, thank you both. Those are great intros, and I'm just really looking forward to hearing both of your stories and kind of where you came from, and you know, kind of where you're at now, and really kind of how you got there. So I'm a creative by background, and you know, strategy is one of those things that in my career I've seen evolve a lot. It kind of began as something that was a little bit more intuitive and not so formal. And some people either applied it or didn't. And so over the years, I've seen that really become something that is critical for a successful campaign. And there are a lot of kind of tools to really put that into action. And so I'm curious though, how each of you guys would define or describe strategy. I mean, so we'll go to you, Kesha. I mean, how do you define or describe strategy?
Yeah. Well, I think for me, strategy is starting from the beginning, and you know, before diagnosing, before prescribing, diagnosing what's happening and what needs to be done. And so it's really important, I think, to take everything in, not only from business needs, but from customer needs and the marketplace, and identify the strategic overlap there to bring forward a holistic strategy that will be effective. So I think it's really, for me, looking at kind of the 360 of what's happening with your customers, the marketplace, and your business needs to get to the opportunity.
Awesome. That's a great answer.
I love that.
Brendan?
I think, I mean, I work in cultural strategy, which is like, you know, there's lots of different forms of strategy, whether that be brand strategy or communications or business strategy. I think the like overlap of all of those things is like, as a strategist, our job is to find something that is interesting, but is also helpful. Like you can find lots of things out there that are really great stats or a really emerging insight that's relevant to an audience. But if that thing that you found is not ultimately helpful to the client brief, or, you know, to making strategic recommendations to a client or what have you, if you're not answering the goal of it, then it's not actually anything more than just an interesting insight. So I think that our job is to constantly consume anything and everything, and then sort through, again, out of all of the stuff that we're constantly consuming and exposed to, what is most useful to the given question or to a given brief that we're given on. And again, that applies to any realm of strategy, whether that's looking for cultural insights and trends, or whether that's looking for how do we develop a better target audience, how do we build a better messaging strategy and a channel strategy to meet that. I think that's sort of our kind of guiding light, is sitting at that intersection regardless.
Strategy is certainly a very broad topic with a lot of tangents within, and it can be a lot of things depending on kind of what your business is and what you're looking to solve for, right? So
the mystery is part of how we keep our jobs, is no one really knows for sure what we're doing.
That's what I'm trying to get out of you
them.
guys today, right now. I want the secret sauce. So Brendan, you talked about a little bit going to school for journalism. So, I mean, are there programs? I'm sure there are programs now that are specifically for strategy careers at different colleges throughout the country. So I'm just curious, it doesn't sound like either of you went through a program quite like that. So, you know, how did you find your way specifically into a strategy position? So, I mean, kind of talk about job titles and kind of like the strengths that make someone a better poised for a strategy position. Really kind of what makes a good strategist, and how did you guys find yourself there? What's your unique perspective that makes you good at those jobs?
Yeah, I can jump in. We can do this back and forth, Brendan,
yeah.
if you want. Yeah.
You go.
So for me, I wasn't in a traditional, I was in a general marketing, you know, college where it was a very general path. And so what I found myself in is, a very traditional agency path, like I had mentioned. But I think I found myself in situations where I was continuing to collaborate in the research phase of things, where there was research design that was helping us get to that nugget. And I personally was very attracted to the deep dive of that and the exploration of that. And so I think naturally I was spending my time kind of in that curiosity place and collaborating on that front end of work before we even get to the brief. And I think it was just a natural, I guess, addition that I brought to the work. And in the agency model that I was brought up in, there weren't strategic planners. But I think the beautiful thing that I experienced was, there are roles in the agency space for people who are maybe more project minded and more, I guess, in that very to-do list sort of thing that add a ton of value to the project. And then there's account people that are also very strategic minded. And so I loved that there was a chance to kind of choose that path and grow equally in the space. And so once that happened for me, where I got the opportunity to move into a strategic planning role, it was a lot of figuring out what I was doing, because I didn't have the training, I had the instinct for it. And so for me, it looked like a mentorship where I was working with my boss and my mentor, and then others in the research space to really hone in on what does it look like to be a strategic planner. And so it was a lot of trial and error, and it was also a lot of teaching clients why it's different and how we're looking ahead versus looking at what's happening today or tomorrow, and teaching them how do we prepare for that from a research investment standpoint. So it was a lot of self-taught, but also having people come around and defining that together and figuring out how to make it happen. And I think, like Brendan said, strategy is very wide and deep. And I think that it's easy to think that it's something that it just happens in a way that it's very layered. And so you can go as deep or not deep in strategy as you want. And I find that with my clients today, it's like some need more, and some, they don't want to peek behind the curtain. They just want you to tell them what they should do. So I think that there's lots of layers to it as well.
Awesome.
Yeah, and I would say from my early ons, like Mizzou's journalism program, I think has really built out its ad program because they've recognized that there's sort of a gap in the marketplace. Like there's a really good PR program, there's a really good marketing program, but like when it comes to like building more strategic thinkers and strategic planners, I think that they're trying to address that. There's lots of different programs, but what I want to say really is that it doesn't really matter. I think you can go into any sort of marketing or ad world. And I think the thing that I've like found out early on in my career is that like I'm like very non-committal when it comes to professional things. I like to have my hands in a lot of different things. I don't like to make decisions about positions or titles. I like to like spread myself. And I think this sort of like fear of commitment has led me embracing exposure in a lot of different ways from a professional standpoint, and strategy allows you to do that. You can steal a little bit from creative brains, you can steal a little bit from account management brains, you can steal a little bit from like business development standpoint. Think, how do I help organically grow this client over time? So I suppose in that regard, just finding opportunities to become an expert on literally anything, to like become smarter in a room. You don't have to be, I think there's very few junior strategist positions for people coming out of school. And I think it's even harder for people to make a mid-career pivot into the strategy when you feel like you've invested so much time in becoming either a creative or an account leader. But in reality, like so many of those skills are so applicable to what we do is from a strategy and planning perspective, that it's about finding the right team that's willing to invest the time to help you figure it out, because I think that those skills will apply so greatly when it comes to actually becoming a better strategist. And agencies recognize good strategy when it's there, because I think the work improves and the clients are happier. Or at least I like to hope. We'll have to ask my clients whether they agree or not. But that's, I think the the short of the long answer is that there is really no one path to get there. My first position was a millennial account coordinator, which like I think that was like the peak of like eye rolling job title positions. So you can kind of figure out whatever you want as long as you have a desire and say, I want to be on that team, and again, find ways to get there. I think it's all about finding the team that's willing to invest in you.
So Kesha, you had mentioned something about, kind of a mentality or just the way, certain people are almost wired in a way that makes them a really good strategist, or at least somebody who can think that way. Would you guys agree to that it is almost a certain frame of mind or a way of thinking that makes someone kind of innately more inclined to be good at strategy and think about those things, because there's a lot of curiosity that goes into it, a lot of creativity, but at the same time, you've got to have the research and the organization and the project management, almost even like you were saying, Kesha, almost like the best of both worlds. But would you guys agree that it is almost like a mindset more than anything else, maybe?
I tend to think so, but I think that one thing that I always want to be careful of is a strategist isn't any better than any other person in the organization. And so I think sometimes people feel like if they're not in that path, that they don't have something valuable to offer. And I think the whole thing about strategy is the curiosity of it. And the other thing about strategy, where I'm a very curious person, but I'm not as good at distilling it down. And I recognize that in a strategic role, like Brendan said, that's the kind of the golden nugget of it all, is being able to simplify, sort through everything and simplify it. And so for me, curiosity and being able to simplify and get to that big idea are really things that make us really strong strategist. And I think that, and there's opportunities to, like Brendan said, paint your own path. Or one of the things that I agree with and totally love is that become an expert on something. And then that can make you a strategist in a very specific niche that maybe you're passionate about, that is maybe more cultural versus target audience or whatever. So I do think it's a mindset, but I also think that there's room for many different types of strategists.
Yeah, agree 100%. I think when I first moved to New York, one of the first things I did, I have always wanted to try stand-up comedy. And so I took a stand-up comedy class. And as our teacher was sort of explaining like the basis of like, it's not about just like coming up and like giving one-liners, like every good like strategy approaching a stand-up joke is about like having a premise of a joke and then having an insight about that premise that's unique. So I was like, oh my gosh, it's exactly like brand strategy or like strategy in general. It's about showing people something that they see all the time that they're really familiar with. And then it's about like flipping that and showing a unique perspective that might be interesting or different. So I think very much in the same way, like the way that we recognize really, like, I see so much good strategy work out in the world and I'm like unbelievably jealous of it. But I think like it has nothing really to do with the person and more about like sort of a yes and type of improv mindset of being willing to always take on a different perspective or challenge something. And that's something just like Kesha said, that anybody can do regardless of department. So
that's great. So we've talked a lot about kind of the fun, the interesting, aspects of strategy. I want to hear, like, what are the tough aspects of your guys' jobs? What's a maybe a story of something gone wrong? So show us the other side of the story, if you will. Kesha?
Ooh, something gone wrong. I think, I don't know if I have a specific story about that, but I do think that the challenges that we find ourselves in is being authentic to what's happening in the world versus I think in marketing and research historically, you can contrive what you want to have happen. And strategy is not effective unless we can be very authentic in what we're bringing forward, in what we see in the research, what we see in the marketplace. And so I think that that is a challenge right there, is to just be as authentic and truthful with what we're delivering, because that's what's going to resonate with the audience the most. I think the other thing that I've struggled with within the last few years is the amount of information available and the amount of content and the pace in which things are moving, to be able to be to stay on top of things. And so I think that we have to find our little tips and tricks to that, which is, finding the resources that you can rely on and continually staying connected to make sure that you have a fresh perspective. I also think that, culturally speaking, we are taking things in that are outside of our jobs, but the movies we watch, the art exhibits we attend, like those are all things that are informing us. And I think if we try to keep that hat on all the time, to remember that these are all things that help us kind of get to strategic opportunities by being informed on what's happening in the world, culturally and beyond. So I think that's the biggest thing, is not being overwhelmed by everything that's coming at you, but trying to take in all of that in a way that adds to the work that you're doing. I'll try to think if I have an example of something gone wrong, but Brendan, I'll pass it over to you for now.
No, I think what you're touching on, this like endless desire to like consume information and stay on top of things. I think another thing that's very much directly connected to for me is like, that often feels very isolating from a professional standpoint. Like if you think about creatives, you're often paired, writer, designer. If you think about account people, like they're partnered both, with account people within the agency, and they're also partnered with clients. But oftentimes it's like, hey, strategist, go find something unique and interesting, and that's going to really drive home like the differentiator for this campaign. And one thing that I've tried to do is find other people, whether that be other strategists that have other perspectives to bounce ideas off of, whether that be just other people in general, to try to, again, like, how do we not just act or think within our own biases and on our own bubble, but again, try to reach out and again, like Kesha was saying, that can be in a number of different things. How do we expose ourselves to weird things that we might not actually have, that's going to be able to help push our brief or push our ideas further? I think that's probably the most one. I think the other obvious thing in strategy is like, some places don't see the value in it, so you always feel like you're trying to prove that value. And that often means, like, again, finding the one little nugget feels like it can take hours and hours and hours, and proving the return on interest of a time spent of trying to make things a little bit better, a little bit more targeted, often feels a little bit, I think that's oftentimes where people get that imposter syndrome within this department. It feels like you're always trying to prove yourself in every meeting or in any given project to make that the best that it can be. So I think those are the two biggest struggles that I've had, at least in the last couple of years.
Great. It's great input. So another thing you guys both touched on a little bit is just staying on top of trends, and how that can be pretty overwhelming to keep up with, just because there's so much content, things change so quickly. So I guess my question would be, what secrets, what advice would you have for someone? What tactics do you guys use specifically to keep up with trends, because they do change so quickly?
Yeah, for me, it's kind of changed because I have embarked on business ownership, and we're kind of in the smaller state of our business. I don't have the luxury of having access to as much paid content as I used to. So I have to be scrappy, and so I think for me is one, just taking 15, it could be 15 minutes a day, and reading something new, and just, making space in your day to immerse yourself in something. Secondly, I feel really strongly about choosing something that you want to learn and investing your time there, to become, like you said, Brendan, an expert on something that you can add value to, and getting really specific with what you want to focus on and going deep with that. So that's, for me, is where I'm spending my time now on trying to stay sharp. If I feel stuck in in any of my work that I'm doing, I definitely take, I just step away from it and I go read something, and I get inspired by case studies, research studies, what's happening culturally. And that's a way for me to get unstuck pretty quickly.
Awesome.
I would say, I love what Kesha was saying about it being very natural and authentic to you. I'm a terrible book reader, but like there's so much good books out there. So I've started doing, I love podcasts and I love doing books on tape. So I think for me, especially thinking about like the pandemic and like the importance of my commute and how my commute was sort of a ritual for me of where I was consuming stuff. I think it's made me be more present and like thinking about like, again, intentionality behind that consumption. So I make sure that I listen to podcasts in the morning if I go on a run or something like that. I love TikTok, which by the way, if you want the latest and greatest trends, the kids these days are doing crazy stuff on there. But I love kind of those more cultural examples that pop up on TikTok that ripple out through other mediums too, right? So like I love being on Twitter for like news, but you know, Reddit has so many great like weird subgroups of people. One thing that I remember being really interesting last year was like a Facebook group of people that were just pretending to be ants, and like that was the whole Facebook group. So like there's so many weird fringe things out there that like that aren't necessarily in like our mainstream ways of consumption that you'd get like through a newsletter, but definitely do read newsletters too. I think that's the first one, but the underlying kind of thought here is more around those rituals. One thing that we do at Sparks and Honey that is like immensely helpful, so some of this like cultural sharing is kind of built in from a professional standpoint for me, is we have daily culture briefings. So every day for like an hour, we meet as an agency, and we've been doing it online now. Not quite the same, but it's still, I think, a really useful tool. But it's like, hey, let's react to things that are going on in the world and try to you know, match them back to what's going on in different projects that we're working on. If I'm working on a project right now that's all about 5G connectivity. There might be something that I can learn from my coworker that's working on a project around food and beverage or health and beauty. And I think identifying those patterns and setting time up to like collaborate and kind of identify like where there are connections across different projects or work streams is something that anybody can do. It just takes time, it takes practice, and it takes like dedicating space to like having those collaborations to again create those patterns as a team. And I think that's something that any strategist can do within their team. It's something that any strategist can do within their client team too. So create rituals for number one for sure, and listen to a lot of and watch a lot of TikTok for sure is number two.
All right, so we're coming up on time here, so I'm gonna ask one last question for you guys, and you know, it's what everybody wants to know. You know, we need some predictions for marketing behavior in the next 12 to 18 months. So this is where you really kind of shine. Show us your worth here, guys. Kesha, what do you got?
I think one major one that is super evident and maybe not, hopefully not too obvious, is the authenticity that is required of brands at this point. I think when we think about social content and even advertising spend, what brands can no longer BS and get by with it. And I think that that's hard for brands. And so I think that's one major thing, is that we have to see a shift in delivering content that feels real. And then another big thing for me, from my purview, is the content marketing and in the video space is going to continue to boom. And I think we have to be really agile in how we create, so that we can be relevant and in the moment. And so I think that changes production. I think that changes how we approach, you know, content strategy, and how we collaborate with our clients, so that we can be as relevant as possible. I have more to share, but Brendan, I'm going to pass it to you. And if we have more time, we can go back and forth.
We can always add more future predictions and leave ourselves out to dry. I think one big thing that I'm loving, especially right now, that brands are leaning into and should continue to, is nostalgia. I think back to, you know, the revival of the guy was, you know, drinking ocean spray, you know, riding down LA streets, and like for whatever reason, like we were very grounded because of the moment. And I think that more and more brands are thinking about nostalgia as a way to provide comfort. So what does the future of comfort actually look like? You know, I'm wearing gym shorts and a t-shirt right now, and we're showing up to a conference right now. So I think nostalgia and the role of comfort is something that I think is really interesting for us to think about. I did a really cool report last year on the future of giving and philanthropic donations. One of the most striking things to me was the importance of community, but the lack of religious affiliation connected to that. So I think over the last 30 years, donations to religious organizations has dropped in half. It was originally 65 or 70% of all religious donations or of donations were from a religious organization. I think we're at a time where we're needing community and connection more than ever before, and we don't know where to turn to it. Am I saying that I should, ditch my Catholicism in exchange for, a Facebook group that's dedicated to pretending like ants? Absolutely not. But I do think that there is a role for brands, organizations, and platforms to be this bridge that's lacking, that we're not exactly sure where we should be gravitating towards now. We're not exactly sure where our values are lining up because we're at a time that's so conflicting. So I think there's a lot of opportunity for strategists to be mitigators and de-escalate and find more connections and sense of community for people in the pockets that they already are. Again, I'm not saying that is existing on a Facebook group, but maybe that's the challenge for us, is to help people find that unity and make the world a little bit better, one TikTok at a time or something like that.
Great. Hey, so we got about 15 minutes left, and I would just say for those of you guys in the room here, if you do have any questions, you can either drop them in the chat there, and we will address them. Or I suppose you could just go off mute and just jump right in and chat with us here. So either way, if you guys have something, do either of those. And if nothing shows up, we'll just keep chatting. So anything? Okay, nobody coming right in. That's fine. Well, we'll be keeping an eye on the chat if you guys want to drop anything in there. Brendan, you talked about comfort, and it reminded me of something I heard, I think just yesterday on the news. And they were kind of talking about the opposite, actually, where people are starting to spend money again and go out because these restrictions are being lifted, and they're splurging. They're buying fancy clothes. They're getting fancy, hair and nails and makeup and extensions for their eyelashes, and all kinds of crazy things are going on, more so than usual. And so I wonder if that is something that is taking off right now, and that people are kind of maybe leaving that comfort zone that we've all been kind of hunkered down into for the past 18 months or whatever, and about to kind of break loose.
Well, if you want to get real awkward here, I've just did a future of sexual health, and the number of people that are back on dating apps and again, going out to dinners and stuff. There is I think we are seeing a big reopening for sure. Now, whether or not, I think that there's obviously going to be, we're looking at this being right now, people are going back out in the world. Will that continue to be this sky high? I'm not so sure about that, but yeah, absolutely. I think sort of as to be expected. I think kind of going back to our earlier conversation around rituals, I think what will be fun from a strategy perspective to look at is what is changing around that based on new realities or expectations. Looking specifically about dating, last year on that report that we worked on was all about whether or not you wore a mask was a mandatory for some people in looking for a partner. So those are some things that are going to have lasting ripple effects much further into the future. I'm kind of curious the way that people's value sets change. I'm also kind of curious to see, again, once this giant splurge of spending topples off, where did it actually all go? Was it really about spending for other people? Was it really about spending for myself and making myself feel better as I go out into the world? I think there's a lot of complexities that are not just oh, people are ready to go out and they're ready to spend. I think there's just going to be a lot more learnings that we can see of, again, was this just a post-COVID and post-quarantine and reopening up moment, or are there more things here worth diving into that are going to have obviously huge brand implications too?
Absolutely. So we got a couple questions in the chat. I'll read this first one from Ashley. How do you both measure effectiveness of the strategy you provide? How do you handle failed strategy when it doesn't work out? So first, how do you measure it? Kind of prove the ROI. And then when it doesn't work, what then? Kesha, any thoughts?
Yeah. Well, I think that fortunately we're in a position where we can test a lot of things out. So whether you have the budget to do some research in advance of launch, you have a opportunity to kind of see how things might perform. And then I think from there, it's about being agile and looking at the data. I think data analysts and kind of every tool that we have to our to access has to keep us in partnership with our creative and our account teams on our toes to be able to pivot. So I think grateful we're in a place where we can pivot as needed, but also that does make our jobs harder, because we have to be ready for what's next. So that's what I would say.
Yeah, from a brand and a channel strategy perspective, I would say that your metrics should be part of your strategy. You should be thinking about those things as part of the brief. Obviously, you're going to get some of those from the client in terms of what they expect from that. But I think, again, thinking of your own metrics and your own goals and your own kind of like, big, hairy, biggest possible future of this idea being out in the world is kind of part of good strategy. And for me right now, more like specifically, I feel like I just make a lot of keynote presentations of like recommendations that I think. So a lot of the way that I assess my own success is whether or not it makes it out of a deck, whether or not like strategy makes it off of a piece of paper. If it like from a tangible standpoint, if I can say that recommendation came from me, or this insight turned into this action, or this specific tactic for a brand, honestly, that's more than enough for me in terms of my own personal success.
Awesome.
I also think that playing on that, Brendan, it's like when your creative team feels empowered by what you do, that is like one of the best feelings. It's like even before it gets launched, it's like if my creative team can hold on to something, then I feel like I've been successful.
Yeah, love that.
Tim asked a question here. What is one campaign in the marketplace you've seen that you wish you would have thought of the strategy or guide that you would have thought of the strategy or guide to the work? So, what strategies or campaigns have you seen in the marketplace that you've really admired and been kind of jealous of? Like, man, I wish I would have thought of that one. Kesha?
We were just in the office a couple of days ago looking at a water company that's targeting Gen Z, and it's like literally saying this is for Gen Z and it's made by boomers, and it's just like putting it all out there super transparently. And I think it's hilarious, and it just feels so right on. And so I don't know if Josh is on, but that was super inspiring to me, just to kind of see how they brought that to life in a way that's like right on the nose and going after it hard.
I saw that brand in my LinkedIn feed. I think a couple of my friends, maybe at Barclay perhaps, were working on it actually. Gen Z water or whatever. I think it's so, we have a trend at Sparks Honey. It's just absurdism, like leaning into absurdism and a little bit of a nostalgia stake. I love that too. The one that I have like loved for quite some time, I think it was like a year and a half ago maybe, was like Amazon Studios, and it came out of, I think, the UK actually. But the whole idea was that the shows stay with you, and it was all about how watching one of these shows over time, you can see the person through episode 1 all the way to the end is changing their behaviors, changing their mindset as a result of binging television. And I think one of the examples they used was like Breaking Bad, and how this person went from being sort of a wimpy viewer in episode 1 to the end of Breaking Bad. They themselves had also become a more confident and crazy person. So I love that good content and good television tends to stick with you. And I think that's definitely something that's true for me, especially as I think about some of the really dumb and silly TV shows that I watch as well.
So speaking of dumb and silly entertainment, Brendan, when is your Netflix comedy special coming out?
So the question being, how did the stand-up comic gig turn out? It went well. I had a performance or whatever, and then I got accepted to like perform more regularly at a comedy show. And I did that for a few months, and then COVID hit, and that show and club has permanently closed. So I like to say that it was either the best sign that it's time for me to find a new hobby, or that maybe it didn't go so well. But no, I really enjoyed it. I was told I was funny. I haven't gotten back into it since most of the comedy clubs are just now reopening, but I keep telling myself I need to, go through my silly notebook and write something down. So
That's great. Well, Kesha, any final words or a plug for yourself or your company you'd like to share with the group here?
Well, I'm super grateful to have been a part of this. A plug I have is we're looking for a social media content developer and a copywriter. So if anybody knows anybody, send them my way. But it's been really fun to be a part of this. And Brendan, it's been awesome to just hear what you have going on and what's coming from your perspective. And I always enjoy hearing other strategists share what they're seeing. So thank you for collaborating with me on this.
yeah, what a pleasure. Like I said, we got to find more strategist friends to bounce ideas off of. So I'm glad that we were able to do this. And I have nothing to plug other than, make sure that Kesha gets, all the applications in the world that she needs. And you can follow me on Twitter or something like that. So thanks so much to Kesha and to the team and to Chris, who was one of my old client partners. So this was a ton of fun catching up too.
Absolutely. Well, thanks everyone for coming today. I hope you enjoyed the session, and look forward to the next one. I think in July, we've got another one coming up. So if there's nothing else, we'll call it a day. Thanks, everyone.